I'm Ellie Wims. I'm with Core Expand. I won't be doing a lot of talking, just kind of guiding the conversation. All the content will be coming from our hosts, Priya Exantus from Towson University and Monika Skuriat Fritz from Lehigh University. And I'm going to advance the slide and let our hosts tell you a little bit about themselves and introduce themselves. So Priya, if you would.
Hi, everybody. My name is Priya Exantus. As Ellie already said, I'm the manager of trademark licensing at Towson University. I been here for about a little over 3 years, and I transitioned from a licensee standpoint. So I kind of bring a pretty unique role perspective to my role. And prior to that, I kind of did field marketing. So I feel like my path and trajectory has kind of built upon itself. Started off in the field, giving away the tchotchkes, worked for a licensee that worked with the clients giving away the tchotchkes, and now I'm on the other side. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm hoping for a really great discussion.
Thank you, Priya.
Thank you.
And Monika.
Hi, everybody. Monika here. I'm from Lehigh University, as Ellie said. I've been managing the licensing program for probably about 6 years now. Prior to my taking it over, it didn't have a ton of oversight or resources devoted to it. So it was a pretty new program when I took it over and kind of built it out as the years went on, sort of adding resources to it. So prior to that role, mostly in auxiliary services, marketing, communications.
Great, thank you. Both of you have lots of great experience. So here's the outline of today's webinar. We'll be talking about how to establish goals for your program, how to support your school's missions and values. We'll talk about managing royalties. We'll talk about tools that you'll need to do that work. We'll talk about how you can support your school buyers, how to oversee vendors effectively, and what you need to be thinking about in terms of reporting and measuring your performance, and how to know if your program's successful.
I can start. So I think when it was really important to us, sort of when I took over the program, was really supporting the Lehigh University brand in general. So one of our goals was to sort of rein in both sort of the guidelines and the standards that were sort of not developed enough and build those out, and then really put a lot more effort into sort of enforcement of a lot of those guidelines and standards, and making sure that our brand is being represented both positively and promoted where we want it to be in the way that we want it to be. So that was a really big goal, I think, when I took over the program. And then coupled with that, really that fiscal responsibility component of making sure that we are, looking at the vendors that we're using and how we're using them, and sort of looking at, pricing for vendors and different kind of, depending on the project, different kind of product availability and that sort of thing. I'll add to that, sort of our last sort of big goal component was that sustainability and corporate social responsibility piece, which we have over the years added to through being members of the WRC and FLA and that sort of those organizations, and really being able to utilize those resources to make our program, the way that we want it to be. Those were sort of the goals that, were really important to us sort of at the beginning when we built out the program, and it has grown. All of those have grown over the years.
So very similar on my end. Kind of a little bit of a difference for me personally when I started. We also rebranded. So I came into the university, we rebranded, also implemented an internal royalty. So for us, education was a really big piece, kind of coming in terms of, re-educating people that we do have a licensing program. There was a very big misconception when I started that I came with licensing and there was never licensing before that. So really just coming in, educating people on the importance of licensing, why we're here. And it kind of doing that through the school's missions, right? Like we have this really bold, unique brand that's now new, and we want to make sure that we are representing ourselves really well in the marketplace with that internal royalty, similar to what Monika said, really capitalizing on that, right? And not only capitalizing on it in terms of like revenue generation, but also savings, right? So trying to figure out and analyze, where can we begin to start tracking this information? How can we track this information so that we are making sure that we're capitalizing on this, creating extra income, streams of income, as well as saving the university money. So going kind of how Ellie put up here, supporting our MBE SBR goals, we have as a state institution have specific quotas that we need to reach. So again, kind of going back to analyzing what are the best ways that we can do this? How can we support some of our smaller businesses while generating income, as well as saving the university money, all kind of in the same, while protecting our new brand.
What's important when it comes to the missions and values for Towson?
Yeah, so as you kind of have up here, specifically, one of the big things that I kind of came into to push was our local spending. So analyzing who our internal vendors are. We defined local as the state of Maryland. It was kind of difficult because especially the region that we're in, we're very close to Pennsylvania and Delaware. So some places in Delaware are closer than some of our other, some of our vendors' locations in Maryland, but we defined local as Maryland. So really enhancing our local spend. And one of the things that I did to kind of bring everyone up to speed, both from an institutional side and a vendor side when I first started, was I actually did a local meet and greet. So I went into our, we're a partner with CLC. So I went into brand manager, ran our reports for who our local companies are. And I reached out to everybody to introduce myself, to say, I'm new here, we're rebranding. I really want to make sure that what our goals and values are aligning with your mission. So I actually went kind of like a tour, like a mini road tour, and I went to all of the different vendors in the state of Maryland and sat down with them, showing them the where they're licensed, making sure that it's in line with what they're actually producing. So just again, to kind of reiterate where we stand, how we want to bring more spending to our local vendors, fair labor, making sure that everybody's FLA, we're an FLA school, making sure that everyone's kind of up to speed and all of the boxes were checked. I think that was one of the biggest things for me kind of coming in, was that there, again, the misconception that I brought licensing to Towson, there was a lot of boxes that weren't quite checked off. People weren't actually licensed that were doing business with the university. They weren't, registered with FLA. So I think just kind of bringing everybody, making sure that everybody is in compliance with both the university and through CLC. So there was a lot of groundwork that needed to be done on our end to really make sure that everybody's up and running. And part of that, again, is with the new brand, especially with it being a new brand, we wanted to make sure that everybody was kind of crossing their T's and dotting their I's, making sure that they understood all those small nuances. For example, we have a small little shadow between our T and the U, and it gets overlooked. So just kind of reiterating some of the really key important parts of who we are and what we're looking to do. And I obviously wanted to make it mutually beneficial. And that's, I to this day still kind of set check-ins like quarterly or, maybe twice a year, where I'm meeting with my vendors just to kind of check in and say, hey, what's going on? How can we, how are you feeling? What can I do from my standpoint to, increase spending with you guys? And again, for me, it was specifically local vendors was kind of our big initiative when I first came in.
Yeah, I love the roadshow example. I think in our program as well, a big component is that partnership management, and making sure that we're really connecting with our licensed vendors, that they know who I am, that when they receive a note back on a design asking them to change something, it's literally me every single time asking them to do that. So if they have a question about it or if there's an issue about it, they're always welcome to reach out to me. Same goes for staff or student clubs. If they get a bounce back from a vendor saying, hey, this didn't go through licensing, I want it to be very clear that I am licensing, like I'm always the person, so that there's an actual point of contact and a human behind some of these, some of the notes and some of the requests, or some of the unfortunately rejections on some designs, because I really do try to approach it, obviously with that customer service hat on, and, how can I help you succeed? How can I help facilitate this in a way that's going to both meet your customers' needs, your needs, our needs, and truly make it a partnership, so that component is really important to us. So I love the roadshow example.
I agree. And I think it goes back to that relationship building, right? Too, because same thing. A lot of people I get, previously would try to email CLC when they would get a rejection in brand manager, or they would email me and say, oh, CLC rejected this. And I think it's very important to let people know, like, we are the face and we are human, and always be able to reach out. And I think I've done a pretty decent job at that now. Everyone knows a lot of times when they think that something might get rejected, they'll email me first. Hey, before I send this in brand manager and there's any kind of back and forth, is this good to go? And I always welcome that as well. I'm going to have to review it anyway. So it's nice for me to see it beforehand, and that does kind of reduce some back and forth within brand manager, because I think sometimes I don't know how quickly they get those notifications, or how much they're paying attention to those things versus an email coming from me personally.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. That oh, CLC rejected my design, or licensing rejected my design, always makes me laugh, especially when it's sent directly to me. It's like, nope, it was me. Hi. But it's such a great opportunity to educate, and then to make sure that they understand that, I'm the resource, we're the resource, going forward, that they can reach out to.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to royalties. So yeah, I'd love to hear your discussion about, how important this is, what it does to the school, and, what you're seeing in terms of trends in royalties. Monika, would you mind kicking off there?
Sure. So I think from an educational, institution in general, I think everyone kind of sees the importance of revenue coming in that is not just from tuition. I know Priya and I had talked about this with Elliot as well, kind of the importance of finding other revenue generating programs, and things that will help fund our student experience and our student scholarships and our athletic departments. So licensing is a really big component of that for us, as it is for a lot of schools. So that's really important to us, and it definitely funds a lot of really important things across campus. We have both a standard royalty and an internal royalty for internal orders. So it's incredibly important for us, and we've seen it become more and more important, especially throughout the pandemic, and with an added focus on reducing costs as well as generating revenue.
And same for us, royalty, we have both a standard and an internal royalty. Our internal royalty rate is half of our standard royalty rate. So it is a little bit less than kind of what you'll see in the retail space. And that was one thing too, coming in, kind of how we set that, and how we had to kind of redefine what we considered to be internal versus standard retail. And same thing, there was a lot of boxes that needed to be checked, and things, kind of brains that needed to be reeled in a little bit when I started. And that was probably one of the biggest ones, is that a lot of our internal licensees were producing things that could technically be sold at retail, right? So the way that we kind of reel that in a little bit is that internal licensees must have a department and or an event name associated with it, something that you might not typically see in that retail space, since they are paying, like those vendors are paying half that royalty rate comparatively to our standard licensees. We wanted to make sure that I guess, like, the rights were not quite the same, just because there's different costs associated with that. And for us, it really was kind of, Monika, like what you said, we came in to look at, how can we increase revenue? How can we decrease costs? So we really encourage folks to look at multiple vendors, consider different avenues to receive the same products. And I know we might be talking about this later from that licensee standpoint, really understanding the difference between a distributor and a manufacturer, and how a lot of the distributors is who we go through, and seeing that a lot of them have access to the same manufacturers. It's kind of, the way they price things out, you could potentially work with a vendor that is charging you less than you typically had in the past, even with those royalties applied. So not only are you saving money as a buyer, but then the university is receiving a portion of that back with that internal royalty applied. And same thing, coming all back into the university, helping to fund initiatives and programs that we have on campus. Our goal eventually, as we grow our licensing program, is to look at, different initiatives that we have that can maybe go to very specific programs or departments on campus as we continue to grow our program. So really looking forward to not only being able to, obviously sales is what it all kind of comes down to, but I'm looking forward to the opportunity to use those sales to kind of funnel and channel those royalties and that revenue in different ways.
And then in terms of tools of the trade, and the tools that you use to do your job, could you talk a little bit about that? Priya, I'll ask you to kick that off.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, as I mentioned, we partner with CLC. So we do through that, they do all of our vendor management. They have their brand manager 360 platform where, excuse me, all of the vendors can report their royalties as well as upload artwork for approval. And in addition to that, from an internal standpoint, we utilize Agora Quote for our quoting and ordering. So we actually require all of our internal constituents to use it. So as I mentioned previously, we had to kind of redefine what we consider internal. We had to look at who truly are our internal vendors, who our internal buyers are. So we also had to redefine how we defined internal spending. So previously, internal was just if you're using it as a giveaway. And the way that we redefined it now is anything that is bearing a department and or event name, in addition to it's being bought with university funds. So whether that's, you're putting things on a pro card, if you're using your department budget with a budget department code, or foundation money is what we kind of deem to what we called internal. So anything that falls under that category, our buyers are required to use the Agora Quote platform. We don't have we don't have it set up where they have to bid it out. We encourage it. Just so, again, going back to making sure that you're getting the best deal, that you are getting competitive pricing, and I don't know, just maybe even working with a new vendor that you might get a chance that you didn't know previously existed. And so we don't require it, but I do see that since we've kind of made this a requirement, we do see that folks are using it as a bidding tool, just to send it out. As a state institution, we do have requirements above 5,000. So once an order goes over 5,000, they have to bid it out. So this is a great way too, where everything's kind of uniform. They know exactly what to expect. They can send these quotes back to procurement. They look very consistent. Procurement's not having to figure out where the information is. So we've found a lot of use in this. It tracks the royalties, it reports the royalty, not reports the royalties, it adds the royalties. So I, from my standpoint, can see that. And when I run a report, I can see exactly how much is being spent from an internal standpoint. So I see how many quotes there are, how many of those turned into orders. And I have the ability to track all of that from an internal standpoint. And that's been very useful for us.
Thank you. And Monika, what about you?
Sure. We also partner with CLC, so we use their platform for a lot of the reporting and sort of the licensing management component of it. We also recently launched our crafters program, which we're also doing through CLC, called Community Connect. So those are two portals, and then we use Agora Quote for our internal quoting. Like I mentioned, when I took over the program, and this has increased in importance over the years, and especially in recent years, is that transparency and the kind of increased fiscal responsibility. And so when I was, encouraging folks to get multiple quotes and see what other options are out there, it was a little bit of a hard sell because doing it manually, because it's very time intensive. And so we implemented this, and and we utilize it for getting multiple quotes for our departments.
And then, yeah, let's talk about the benefits for the buyers. Monika, if I could ask you just to, continue on and talk about, how this supports your buyers.
Definitely. Yeah. I figured this slide was coming up, so I didn't want to, mention everything all in the previous one.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's has a lot of benefits for us. Like I mentioned, in terms of increased transparency and fiscal responsibility. So if you think about the amount of time that it would take for one of our departments to, pull a list of all of our licensed vendors that produce products in the product category that they're interested in, getting all that contact information together, putting together an email and sending it to all of those vendors, trying to come up with all of the different information that the vendor might need in order to provide a comprehensive quote. And then manually tracking in a spreadsheet or what have you, all of the responses that are coming through. Everyone could imagine and probably does who might deal with this, that it's a really time intensive process, and people, it's a barrier. And people weren't doing it as much. And so people weren't going for the best deal. They were mostly going for the easiest deal. And that would be, Joe, whoever down the road who they've been working with, which that's great. If Joe's been a good partner with the university, we love that as a licensed vendor. But that's, over the last decade, if that's the only person they've been using, and they have not reached out to anybody else. And perhaps Joe's business model has changed and we're not aware of it, and pricing has changed and we're not aware of it. The lack of the transparency into that process is really what we wanted to correct. We wanted to know whether there was a better deal out there, and I'll let Priya kind of dive into the kind of discussion about lower price does not equal lower quality. But that was a really big component of why we implemented this, and the benefits that we receive from it is that it just gives you a picture of, one, it's you fill out a form, you click submit, and it goes to all these vendors without you having to go through that manual process. And then once vendors are submitting quotes, it really allows you kind of to see the differences out there. We don't require departments to choose the lowest. They can choose best fit, if they're looking for the highest quality, because that's the event that they're having, then that's what they will choose, and that's what they can choose. But at least it gives them the opportunity to shop around, again, with confidence, as the slide says.
Yeah,
Priya, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think you have a good example about the, not picking the lowest price necessarily, the mask example that you shared. I wonder if you would mind talking that through a little bit before, and then talking about the benefits.
You mean the pillowcase example?
No, you said something about an event and the masks. Oh, was it yours, Monika? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had our mask for commencement. Yeah, and in that scenario, our commencement committee wanted to provide our volunteers with masks, and so I used the system, I think it was last year, to source masks. And in that case, we really were looking for the highest quality. We weren't necessarily looking for the lowest cost, because we wanted like the best masks for our volunteers to wear at commencement. So the system allowed us to do that. So it's not necessarily looking at, I think even our vendors at the beginning, some worried that, well, if I get outbid, I won't get the business, but that's not always what we're looking for. We're not always looking for the cost, but we would like to know what are all of our options out there. And we would like to know that in a much easier and faster way, which this provides us with.
Thank you. And yeah, Priya, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I can kind of piggyback that, in terms of, as we said, like ensuring vendors are licensed. So going back to, really vendor management as a whole, one of the things is, there are certain qualifications that all of these vendors have to have. And, we do partner with CLC for that vendor management, to making sure that they're disclosing all of their supply chain, that they're disclosing their manufacturers. And part of that is, and in terms of fair labor, and part of that's really important for us to shop confidently, right? So when you have, it's easier to have a system that allows you, as Monika said, to just kind of have this information at your fingertips rather than having to go search for it. And I think I know I'd probably be very deterred having to, as a buyer, I would just probably go with who I typically go with. and I'll give the example. Mine was a pillowcase example of why, having licensed vendors are so important, and, having access to licensed vendors and knowing who your licensed vendors are really important. So I had an instance with our health center asking me, they were going through the system. They did all the things, they were doing what they were supposed to do. But we're finding that the cost of branded pillowcases were higher than they really had budgeted for and that they really wanted to spend. And so they came to me, they said, hey, we found this manufacturer direct. I have this contact in China, and they are willing to do it for half the price. And, obviously from my perspective, and Monika mentioned, like, coming from that licensee, I can speak a little bit from a different perspective. I was like, I got worried, right? Like, immediately I was like, half the cost, you're working directly with the manufacturer. I don't know. I'm not comfortable with this. And I said, we really do require everyone to go through licensed vendors. They have access to all of our brands. They have our branding guidelines. There's some accountability that they have to have in order to work with us. So if something goes wrong, we can hold them accountable. It takes some legality issues off of our plate. I can't guarantee that, right, with unlicensed vendors. And then that responsibility could potentially fall on us as an institution. And obviously nobody wants to have to worry about that. So there was a lot of back and forth. They didn't take the hard no my first time pretty well. So we went back and forth, and finally I said, okay, well, listen, I said, having an understanding from a licensee perspective, working directly with manufacturers, because I was the distributor at the time, working directly with manufacturers, and in my position, I actually worked with factories direct in China. I said, there are differences between what, compliance, as we call it here in the US versus other countries. So I said, here's my thing. There are 3 big testing that needs to be done for something to be considered compliant in the US. And all the manufacturers that our licensed vendors work with all have to disclose this information. So can you show me proof of FDA testing, lead testing, and Prop 65 compliance? I said, if you can show me those 3 reports, I will consider working with this manufacturer directly. I said, but I need to see those reports. Otherwise, like, absolutely, that's a hard no. So he came back about a week later and he said, Priya, they don't do FDA or lead testing. I said, that's probably why it's about half the cost now. Now you understand where that price discrepancy is. And I said, because obviously it costs to do that testing. I said, but if we don't work with a vendor that is licensed, I said, and let's say, God forbid, we get these pillowcases and 10 of our students get lead poisoning. I said, you're going to have to answer to that. I said, we as an institution are going to have to answer to that, because we aren't working with people who are disclosing this information and providing us with this type of testing that brings us up into compliance with US standards. And it shook him into where I needed him to get shaken into. He's a great partner of mine now. He always emails me before he's placing, some, I guess, more sensitive orders. So kind of being able to see and be able to compare these things when you're not necessarily so comfortable with the 1-2 vendors that you've typically gone with, you get a chance to have these types of conversations to go back to that education piece of why this is so important, why we use licensed vendors, and we work with trusted partners to make sure that we're protecting our brand, that we're protecting the safety and security of our consumers all around. And so, yeah, it increased transparency, right? It's like we have these things. I think from the perspective of buyers as well, I think from a buyer-vendor kind of relationship, buyers don't always know the right questions to ask. A lot of times they'll say, oh, I want a pen. From a licensee vendor side, it's like, okay, but there are literally 1 million different types of pens out there. Like, I need a little bit more information. And one of the things that I personally love about the Agora Quote platform from our perspective is it prompts the buyers to enter all of this information. So it gives the vendors a chance to accurately quote, and it kind of reduces a little bit of that back and forth, but it still provides some, transparency and, it is kind of an apples to apples comparison a little bit more. And a lot of times too, the vendors will actually put the code or like I guess almost kind of like a SKU code for the manufacturer. So sometimes if you're paying attention to that as a buyer, you actually can look and say, oh, they're getting this, then these 3 vendors are getting it from the exact same manufacturer. So then you can look at that price. And so it doesn't always have to be with the lowest price, right? If price is part of your deciding factor, of course, that's what you'll go with. But if you're like, okay, I have some room to wiggle and they're getting, I know that these 3 pens are coming from the exact same manufacturer, you can go with who you really like to go with. You know, people buy from who they like, and you have the ability to work with somebody that you feel confident and that you trust as a vendor. So that's always helpful.
Yeah,
Great.
extra enforcement of like the importance of using a licensed vendor and the extra kind of access to those lists specifically is, yeah, that's really critical. The licensed vendors, you know, your example is great from a safety perspective. From a, you know, a brand management perspective, you know, those are the vendors that are required to submit their artwork to us, whereas others aren't. Other vendors will sometimes reach out to gain approval that are not licensed. And that's the, you know, I might be able to catch them in that way, or a department or student club will reach out and say, hey, I'm trying to make this t-shirt, but this vendor needs approval from your office, at which point I can tell them no, or guide them toward our, you know, dozens and dozens of vendors that are licensed. We have a pretty large list. And so, you know, this is just another outlet and another resource that we can kind of control that and rein that in a little bit, because, you know, our departments, there's a lot of education. I'm sure Priya can talk about this as well, that goes into getting the campus to use licensed vendors. You know, there could be a new staff member, there could be staff members that just didn't know about it before, or have been doing it incorrectly, or just happen to be using a vendor that they really like that isn't licensed, and they just didn't know that they weren't licensed because that vendor wasn't asking for legal permission. So there are a lot of different scenarios where it, you know, it could still be happening. So having this as a tool, as one more tool for kind of education and funneling folks toward, and departments and student clubs towards licensed vendors, is definitely really helpful and really important. I think I may probably shared this with Priya once in another presentation we did, but there's one, I'll give one story about the importance of using a licensed vendor, and that is Vistaprint, which is not licensed with us. I don't think they're licensed with a lot of schools, but some student club, don't ask me what kind, decided to create shirts. They ordered shirts with our logo sort of on it, and they happened to send them to the mail center and asked the mail center to distribute them into the student mailboxes. That I guess they had a bunch of people in their club ordered those shirts. And so the shirts were folded in such a way that you couldn't see them, except for like one that a mail center staff member happened to notice. And so it said, you know, Lehigh with our little shield, which if you haven't seen it is a shield. It has like a little sun. It's got a heart in the center. And the little heart was replaced with a little pot leaf. And so they had those distributed. They purchased those and had those distributed to students in, I don't know, their club or their group or what have you, you know, using our logo. And it was not licensed vendor, and they did not ask legal permission. And I could have caught that had they been using a licensed vendor. So I always give that story as my cautionary tale for using a licensed vendor, because, you know, those are the vendors that aren't really going to care, and they'll print anything on a shirt. And I know, you know, Priya has given me a pretty good examples too of things that she's seen come across. So yeah, this is a platform to increase the use of licensed vendors is definitely important from a brand protection standpoint. I can speak to these numbers just because I think this is from my program. So this was the first 3 quarters, I think, that we implemented it. I would say we kind of beta tested it 3 months before that, but this was kind of when we really launched it out to publicly to campus. And so there was a huge difference. We saw immediately a huge difference between the average, you know, highest quote versus the average lowest quote for the same, you know, more or less the same maybe quality or same kind of product, which I think really surprised departments. So, that these are, some example numbers from our first 3 quarters of use. You can see 93%, 146, 170%. Like there were big differences in what we were seeing in terms of, the highest quote versus the average lowest quote.
And Priya, I know we don't have your numbers on the screen here, but you see pretty similar. You also see significant differences in the quotes and the savings for your team or for your buyers.
Yeah, we don't have the full numbers. For us, I think the biggest thing was we actually have some way to look at this data, where previously we really didn't even have that chance. So while we kind of could assume that there was going to be some sort of savings, and with working with multiple vendors, that was a really big assumption. So being able to see that actually in physical raw data was really valuable to us, and just kind of goes back to the importance of, why we work with multiple vendors, why multiple vendors want to work with us. And I think also too, one of the big things, and we keep going back to, right, this education piece of educating vendors that this is forcing, I guess, in a way, our internal vendors to get multiple quotes, or rather encouraging them. It was not meant to create a bidding war, right? At the end of the day, I think too, Monika mentioned earlier, Joe down the street, that people were working with that person for, decades because it was comfortable. They knew they were licensed. They didn't have to find extra information or go out their way. But what happens is that when you have a lot of times, and it's not that vendors probably mean to do it maliciously, but they feel empowered to kind of price it the way they want to. Where sometimes I think that we as institutions can get taken advantage of, right? Because people have been working with us. They're like, well, we can mark this up a little bit more, because we know that, Towson University is always going to come to us. And I think when we were able to kind of implement this to encourage really, truly getting multiple quotes from different vendors, I started seeing vendors, their margins started going down. With that, from previous engagements that we had with them, mainly because they wanted to come with the best price. And I always encourage vendors, listen, you should have been coming with the best price from the beginning, right? This is not new, just because now you're worried a little bit because now there's this potential that you are being out to bid, and the vendors don't know, right? So the vendors have no idea if they're going up against one or multiple people. This should have never changed it, right? You should have been doing this. And I think what it does is it almost kind of keeps our vendors in line a little bit more to make sure that they are pricing fairly to us. And in that, we're still seeing savings. Working with the same vendors that we had previously worked with before. So I think that's really valuable as well, is it really also just make sure that our vendors are being as honest. And I tell them all the time, I'm not here to nickel and dime you. I still want you to make a profit, but I want you to be fair with us. And I want you to make sure that you're pricing this in a way that you're not ripping us all off. And I think that vendors have found themselves checking themselves a little bit more too.
And I think it also gives them an opportunity to bid on projects that they never would have before, because that department didn't know that they existed, or that they weren't on that department's list of the vendors that they've worked with previously. So it definitely opens up a lot of opportunity to allow them to bid on projects that they hadn't been included before. And I think, it's important to note that, regardless whether you're using a platform like this, whether you have a homegrown one, whether you're using something different, quoting is really, really important in the licensing program, and for, just increased fiscal responsibility of departments at universities. The focus on the quoting is really crucial. And this platform is a way that Priya and I both do, kind of can do that in a way that's a little bit easier and a little bit more user-friendly for folks.
Great, which leads us nicely into supporting the buyers and the programs that you both have in place to both educate your campus buyers, as well as keep the program fresh and keep, make sure that everybody is up to speed on what those processes are. So Monika, since I've got one of your little, your social media graphics up on here, I wondered if you could talk through the tools that you use to communicate with your buyers to make sure everybody's following the rules.
Definitely. So, it's a multifaceted approach many times throughout the year. So, whether it's, webinars at different events, or we have a social media account for our licensing program that I manage that is kind of part getting folks excited about new merchandise and the different retailers that are selling our merchandise, and also campus education about sort of these rules that we have in place and these different tools that we have in place for them to use, and a lot of direct emailing to our staff, a lot of internal kind of communication channels that we have access to. A big component of it is kind of constant continuous education. I mean, not only are we getting, new staff members periodically, we're getting new students every 4 years, that are, and that means that club presidents are rotating, club treasurers are rotating, all those folks sort of that might be in charge of buying or have participation in the buying process are changing over. And, people just forget sometimes. And if it's not, on constantly kind of being put in front of them in different ways and different platforms and in different helpful kind of ways, you might tend to forget about it, which, is the same with any other kind of topic. So I think for me that education component is really important. And so, when we launched this tool in particular, we already had those communication tactics and strategies kind of in place, and we just rolled those into that to kind of add to it and incorporate it into that. So it was kind of nice to be able to add that to the communication strategies that we've already had in place. But I'm sure Priya will say the same thing. It's a lot of communication, a lot of reminding.
Yeah, we don't have, we have a little bit more of a smaller box we're allowed to color in from a licensing standpoint. So like we don't have web pages or social media. I have a licensing web page, like a landing page that has kind of minimal information, but in terms of kind of promoting, different vendors or different merchandise, like that's something that we as a state institution kind of can't do in order to reduce any kind of image of favoritism. But for me, a lot of it is, Monika, you mentioned it earlier, it's just knowing there's a human behind all of this stuff has kind of been one of my biggest things, and just making sure that I am constantly emailing it. People know email me is the best way to get in contact with me. I will walk you through whatever. I will set up phone calls. I will teach you how to, access information. I will, I'll show you where to go, what information what you need to look for. And I think part of it, again, is going back to, we talked about buyers don't always know what to ask for. And that's one of the things that I love educating our like internal folks on, is getting them to look at things from a bigger perspective, and so that they're more educated and they can come off more educated, because then they're getting the information that they actually want to receive. Because that was also something I realized coming in, is like there was this like tension almost between some of our buyers and our vendors on campus, because buyers were asking for information that they felt was comprehensive, and vendors were responding with what they felt was an appropriate response, but the buyers weren't actually getting the information that they wanted. So I think that's been probably my biggest thing, is like, listen, our vendors are going to give you the information that you're asking for. So if you feel frustrated in that process in any way, shape, or form, let's revisit maybe how you can ask for the information differently, so that you're actually getting the answers that you want. So I think that's also been, for me personally, Agora Quote has been very helpful for that, because they are physically prompted. It's something that they maybe don't have to remember that checklist. Those are fields that are required. And they felt that they've been getting much better responses because they're actually providing vendors with the information that they need. So that's also been part of it too, is like explaining to why all this information is necessary and needed. Because buyers don't really have an understanding of actually how the vendor process works, and I don't expect them to. So it's just a matter of, continuously educating them on best practices, best methods of communication, not only for myself, but how the buyers and the vendors are communicating with each other as well.
Great, thank you. And then the next couple of slides are just the screenshots from the portals that you both have up that your buyers can connect with when they get, when they're getting started with a project. So this is a screenshot of the one from Towson, obviously. And then we've got the one from Lehigh. So these are your kind of communication portals and the ways that you funnel your buyers into the process. So let's turn to vendors. Let's talk about vendor management and how you work with vendors. And Priya, if you wouldn't mind kicking off here, what your process is. And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier about, when you came on, you did the roadshow and you talked to all the vendors, but from an ongoing perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah, and I think Monika, I know, touched on a couple of these things as well earlier. For my vendors, the biggest thing is higher ed is a beast, right? And especially, again, coming from a licensee standpoint, and it's like, there are so many different contacts at the university. I get bombarded all the time from vendors. Do you have a list of contacts? And I'm like, I don't even have that information. And even with utilizing Agora Quote, I tell them that's not always accurate information, because there's times I might be tasked from the higher beings to put in and get quotes because they have a project they want to bid on. I'm not the one buying that. I have absolutely no money. There's no budget. I have no card. I can't purchase anything. So a lot of the times I think I don't have that information available. So I think one of the things from a vendor side is they not only, as Monika mentioned before, more opportunities to bid on projects when you're kind of getting exposed, but this is a way that vendors can actually get in front of buyers, right? For our perspective, we have required our buyers to use Agora Quote. So anybody who is requesting any kind of information has to go through here, and our vendors kind of get to be in front of that. And I think that's something that's really valuable from our standpoint, because our vendors now don't have to come on campus and guess who somebody might be buying, or spend an hour on a pitch, like a phone call pitch, and that person being like, I'm just an admin that enters the orders. Like, I have no buying power. So I think that educating the vendors on, again, that piece of it too. And I had to learn that coming into this. It also explained why some of my higher ed clients took a long time to get approvals from a vendor standpoint. So I feel like being able to reiterate and explain the process from both sides, because I think both sides have a really unique perspective. Buyers sometimes are quoting things just to get ideas. Sometimes they want to move something quickly, but it has to get approved from 12 different people, and maybe the person who's entering the order can't actually talk to the person that is ordering things. I personally had to put in an order for lapel pins, and that was direct from the president. I can't walk up to the president and be like, hey, can you look at this really quick for me? I just need to get the vendor to okay it. I don't have that authority, right? So that approval process might take a couple of weeks, and having the vendors understand some of how that works from a higher ed standpoint specifically, right? Understanding how some of those processes work allows the vendors to also look back at their timeline. So if they're working with somebody who needs something by a specific date, maybe they have to up, when their communication begins and how their communication begins. So again, for me, it's just a big thing with educating the policies, procedures, and how it works and what that timeline might consist of, so that they can come with their best foot forward.
I think for me as well, that's definitely all true. And the concept that we would like these vendors to be good partners with us, and then in turn, we want to be good partners for them. And I think that COVID changed a lot of how we work on campus and a lot of how a lot of people work on campus. Some people are fully remote, some people are hybrid, some people, have kind of shifting schedules. And so this old school mindset of a vendor showing up to an office and pitching in person, which I know there are still some vendors on our list who had that kind of mindset. That's not effective anymore. And so, either through this process or just through me promoting them through our licensing program and sharing the lists with our departments and making sure that, I'm being a good partner for them. And because they've chosen to follow our rules and to join our various affiliations that we require and to sign our, contract of behavior and corporate social responsibility and all that really valuable stuff. I in turn would like to be a good partner for them. And so creating these opportunities for them that might not otherwise be available is really important. This is one platform that we do that. Communicating in general is another way to do that. Managing a program that levels like the playing field is a way to do that. And just, sharing information we can and educating staff on campus about our vendors is a great way to do that.
So let's turn to reporting. What kinds of information do you use to, measure and manage your programs? What's important to you both? Let me ask Monika to start there.
Sure. I mean, everything here, I think that obviously the royalty and the cost aversion is probably the two most important things that we look at. And I know that, Priya's institution has other requirements that they require, but those two are definitely important to us. And just seeing also kind of who are the vendors that are participating in some of these processes, because if there's a vendor out there that they're licensed with us, and they have never taken me up an offer to promote their business. They've never responded to a quote. They've never participated in anything on campus. Or, if they're not actually wanting to be good partners, at what point do we say, well, why do you need to be licensed with us? We're really looking not just for another vendor, we're really looking for those kind of solid partners. So that kind of reporting and the opportunity where we're able to pull that kind of data is really nice as well.
Yeah, same for us. In addition, we do have quotas that we have with our MBE and SBR. And so one of the things is that we look to see how much spend we have. Are we getting close to those quotas? Are we adding, is there areas of opportunity? When I first came in, we weren't partnered with any MBEs. We had a handful of SBRs, but we had no MBEs. And it's like, well, we can't encourage people to spend with an MBE if we don't have any MBE licensees. So this actually was being able to see that and know that there's a gap there, allowed us to really put forth efforts into getting on more MBE licensees. So my first year, we actually increased by 200% our MBE involvement. And we've just kind of every year added at least one or two more. There's smaller businesses, so it's a little bit harder for them to really see the benefits of working with us. Is their ROI going to be there? Obviously. And so we've seen a lot of success with utilizing, having multiple vendors. And part of that was, again, back to the education of, hey, we have this spending that we're required to do. Consider it. It's great. We're giving Maryland local licensees business. So consider that. So we actually encourage our buyers, when they're going through the buying process, to at least consider one MBE and SBR as part of their quoting process. Just to see, they don't have to go with them. It's not a requirement. But at least it's giving them a chance to be in front of more buyers. And then our buyers are actually paying attention to some of these things that I think that kind of before you kind of went with who you wanted to go with, and encouraging multiple vendors and spend allows you to think about some of these things that are important to our university and how we are spending our money.
Great. And Priya, I know you shared some kind of before and after views on trying to pull some of this information together, or really the impossibility of pulling, like, MBE reporting, or how you would pull together spend data. Could you kind of walk through the before and after there?
Yeah. So as I have always said, and anybody who's on this call that has heard me talk about Agora before, you guys know I'm a big advocate. So one of the things, I don't know how, honestly, how reports were ran before we had the system in place. The one thing I do know is, right, we have pro cards and we have departmental budget codes. So from us, it was like, they'd have to pull that. You would have to hope that whatever the name on like the credit card report matches the vendor. If that vendor, and they're smaller companies, right, are going through, let's say, a third party credit card service, it might not come up as, MBE vendor. It might come up as like Level Up or something like that. So there was no way to really capture that information accurately. I think with the inception for us of Agora Quote and being able to kind of put our kind of stickers against these vendors, it's a lot easier, right? It's a lot easier for me to manage. I can run MBE and or SBR reports very quickly because I'm looking, that data is getting pulled directly from that platform and system. So I'm just looking at the name. I know we don't have a ton of internal vendors. We don't have a huge amount of MBE or SBR. So the manual work that goes into just kind of filtering that out for me is minimal for what I'm getting out of it, right? I mean, it might take me 5-10 minutes to filter that data into something that's that I can actually send over. We just hired a new director of procurement. I had a meeting with her. She was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And she asked me, she said, well, what did you guys do before? Like, how is this reporting done? And I laughed. I said, I have no idea. I have no idea. I can't imagine. I don't want to imagine. I love this. And it's great, again, because she's kind of taking over the MBE, the MBE liaison position for right now till it can get filled. And she was like, this is great information for me to see, because now I can see exactly how much is being spent. I can see where some of the gaps are, where on my end do I need to be pushing so that we can increase this. And so it allows, I think, having some of these reports too allows me to build those relationships cross-departmentally as well, right? Because now I'm showing, let's say, athletics, what our royalty revenue is and how much more is coming in from an internal standpoint. I'm being able to go to our procurement department and say, hey, our MBEs aren't spending as much as they have. Let's get ourselves out there. Let's go to a couple of MBE events and try to see if we can increase our involvement. So it's allowing me to work differently with departments that those relationships historically were never there, because those conversations weren't had. There was no way to have those conversations. So now it's giving me a chance to and in turn, obviously, they want to support me as the licensing program, because it's beneficial for them. They're getting more spending, they're getting more revenue. So then they're turning to me. So I'm seeing a lot more support cross-departmentally, being able to provide reports of this sort.
How do you recognize success?
So obviously the quantitative piece of it is really important, right? What are royalty revenues looking like? What are bookstore sales looking like? What are other retailer sales and licensing sales looking like? So that's a really big component of it. But I think from sort of a program management standpoint, I think some of the qualitative pieces are just as important. Like for me, when I walk into the bookstore and I see a sea of our correct logo, our correct font, our correct colors, that really supports the brand and makes it look like a uniform, unified fan experience. That to me is successful. Before taking over the program, you'd walk into the bookstore and it looked like knockoff junk that fell off the back of a truck. And it's not necessarily because the vendors were bad. It was because no one was really enforcing that. So there were like 10 different, more than 10, my gosh, dozens of different kinds of fonts that spelled Lehigh and script and this and that and different colors. And so there was really no enforcement of that. And so now when you go in there, you know you're in the Lehigh store, you are at Lehigh University, that they're the Mountain Hawks. And that I think was really important from a brand perspective. And then on the flip side, sort of same, that education component and that reinforcement piece, when I have a vendor reaching out to me directly with a question, when I have a staff member reaching out to me in advance of placing an order and asking me, hey, can you take a look at this design? I want to make sure that it follows guidelines before I send it to the vendor. That to me is success, because that means that they understand that there's a program, they understand what the focus and the goals of the program are, and they understand that I'm the person that they need to come to ask those questions. So from sort of a more, qualitative, kind of, perspective, I think that is really important to me, and that to me spells success, because I know that I'm, and same, if vendors know who I am, and vendors know to come to me for questions. I think that kind of relationship building across campus and across vendors, to me is really kind of the hallmark of our success in our program.
Great,
I
thank
agree.
you. Yeah,
I agree with
go ahead.
all of that. I want to add to one of the things that I personally love is, right, getting everyone up to speed, educating everyone to the point where I love when people send me things and say, hey, is that they have nothing to do with that order, they have nothing to do with that purchase. We'll say, are they allowed to do this? I have like my own little mini brand police out there now, that I have people that are emailing me. And so going back to that brand protection and brand pride, when we are constantly explaining this and really doing our part in educating our buyers and our vendors, and I've had it on both sides. I had a crazy request from a buyer side, and all of my vendors were emailing me. Are you gonna okay this? Are you sure you're gonna okay this? I don't think that you would okay this. And then vice versa, right? Where I have people on campus that said, hey, I saw this sign and I don't think that you would have approved this. So having some of that is something that I find really exciting, because you're doing part of my job now too, right? Like you're taking some of this off, but they're doing it out of pride. They're doing it out of the pride of, I work here, or I go here, or I work with you guys. And I do have a responsibility of sorts. And I think that watching people really take on that responsibility and owning that is huge for me. I've done my job. I have done my job at explaining why our brand is important, why it needs to be protected, why it needs to be promoted, all the P's of licensing, right? And why all of these things are important. And when I see someone who is not associated with licensing reiterating that or coming to me and expressing some of these things, I feel like I've done my job.
Yes, I love snitches.
Yes,
that's the hallmark of a good program. Your snitches.
Great. Oh, wow. Well, thank you. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much. And I've put here a link to a landing page on our website, but we will send out an email after the webinar. So this is just a way to easily access the recording and other information if you're interested in learning more about the quoting tool that both Priya and Monika use. We'd be more than happy to answer questions and talk to you about how that works, and give you a demo of a core quote if you're interested in that. Thank you again, everybody, for today, and have an awesome rest of your day.